Hello, fellow aviators. Welcome to JPL Aviation, where leadership and aviation take off. Today we have with us Tricia Vernola again. Hey, Tricia.
Hi.
And we're going to talk today about the coronavirus and the impacts that it has on the current private jet charter aviation industry. Tricia, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. How was the drive over?
It was nice to get out of the house.
Didn't see a lot of people on the road potentially because of corona, or?
Surprisingly, the freeway was a little bit packed, and I haven't been in the car much, so I felt like my driving skills were kind of on the rusty side.
Oh, there you go. It's Southern California over here, and people are starting to kind of say, screw it a little bit. So
Yeah.
all the protests going on, and
Yeah, it's been a wild time. Never thought I'd live to see this in my day, but
so tell us, for people who didn't watch the interview, a little quick background on summary of what you do in the aviation industry.
yes. So I broker private charters on jets, and basically we move people around the country for personal reasons, business reasons, whatever. But for the most part, these people primarily only fly private aircraft. And it's something that's definitely been affected. The coronavirus has made somewhat of a negative impact on our industry, just like a lot of other industries, unfortunately.
And so what have you seen change within your job specifically right now?
Well, there's always, post-holiday season, there's always a little bit of a dip. There's a few people that do a lot of ski trips and things like that. But for the most part, it was still kind of at a plateau, normal for that time of year. Once these lockdowns and self-isolation started happening, people kind of quickly scrambled to either come home from vacation or go to a secondary home somewhere else in the country, kind of just with the intention of locking down for an indefinite period of time. That lasted for a couple of weeks, and then after that, we slowly saw this, downhill, just kind of a black hole. Everything just kind of stopped. So, other than a few really fluky, flights here and there, the private aviation just kind of came to a standstill.
And so during that time when you had a rise in people wanting to get place to place, were they mostly contacting you, or were you still reaching out and getting most of your deals that way?
We never like to stop marketing. You never want to get too comfortable. Unless you're at a point where you truly cannot take any more business on. It's always good to look for new prospects, but we do have, many of us in the brokering world have our, set our regular clientele. And at that point, they were my focus. I reached out to them first and wanted to make sure they were the most accommodated. And then once I saw that they were taken care of and they were where they needed to be indefinitely, I did reach out to, travel agents, people that I'd done, one-off flights for in the past, and even big email blasts with 50, 60,000 names of, C-level around the country, or, venture capitalists, athletes, agents, all the people that you would normally hit that you want to try to sell to, you just hit them again. And a lot of people actually did want quotes, but we got to a point where people were getting pricing and then not actually taking the trip out of fear, cold feet. At the last minute, they didn't want to go anywhere. And
given the current situation, how hard has it been to schedule aircraft, or has there been any change at all?
They're all over you like white on rice. They're desperate to put hours on the airplanes. So
it's the opposite of what it sounds like. It sounds like they're here, take the plane.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've seen some of the operators have already gone out of business, which we anticipated would happen if this continued any longer than a few weeks, and it has. But no, that people are so desperate that we're seeing things being sold below operating cost of the airplane.
And can you give us an example of just like what a percentage decrease you think that has affected the flights in regards to price?
20 to 60.
Dang, so some people are really undercutting is what it sounds like in order to get business.
I've seen some prices for certain routes come in roughly yeah, I mean, so far below direct operating costs, it's like they're taking a loss to do the trip, which doesn't really make any sense to me, because at that point, then how are you satisfying the aircraft owner if he's actually not making any money? The plane's moving, but he's
Not
losing
making
money.
yep.
Fuel did go down, though, quite a bit. Fuel got super cheap, so that was helpful.
A lot of that has to do with the Trump bans that are going on internationally, and how much has fuel decreased since probably early March?
At one point, it was close to like $1 for jet fuel, which is just insane.
And how did that affect your scheduling with the aircraft and regarding pricing?
Yeah, the pricing, I mean, we have so much leverage now. Obviously, we want to pass those discounts on to our clients as well. This is pricing that we'll probably never see again. But you also don't want them to get too comfortable at such a low number that when things go back to the way that they were, they would have a hard time wrapping their head around paying that much again. So there has to be a happy medium. But in general, we do want to pass. I like passing the discount on to the client because it's like, well, why not take advantage of, some of these are really good clients of mine. And if I can do something that's helpful for them or something that they appreciate or surprised by, then why not?
It sounds like this would actually be a good time for people who couldn't originally fly a private charter, that it would be a good time to meet up with a broker, for example, and book an aircraft that they normally wouldn't be able to afford.
Right. I did get a lot of people reaching out who don't fly private at all, ever. They're always airline people. They may have the means to fly private, but it's just not something that they want to allocate any of their income to, which is understandable. It does get extremely expensive. I mean, you're just in a completely different bracket to be spending, $20, $30, $50, $80,000 on a single flight. So, I did get a lot of inquiries from people that were curious, but unless it's out of pure desperation, I wasn't seeing that those people actually booked the flights. So there was one person, they had a death in the family, and they were terrified to fly commercially with the coronavirus, and so they did take the flight. But in general, it's a very finite amount of people that are going private. So.
And where do you think the industry is headed in the long term? Say, for example, if this shutdown keeps occurring, how do you think that will affect the overall business of your specific field?
That's difficult to say. We don't anticipate that, the country can continue to operate the way that it is. It just doesn't seem realistic. So we're hopeful that that's not the case, and we haven't planned for that. Obviously, we did expect kind of a lull in our business, and that's what we are seeing. There are a few one-offs here and there, and I know that the second things start to open up, which it sounds like some of the states have already kind of...
Georgia was the first one today.
Georgia, and I think was Tennessee on the list as well.
I believe so.
So as they start that transition to open back up, we will start to see... they'll be the first people to start moving again. Not out of, lack of fear, but they have the means to do it, and they've got, deals to close and places to go and people to see that it's just a different caliber of what the rest of America does in general. So I think they'll be the first people to utilize, the flights.
And for someone who is wanting to fly with you and they are concerned about the coronavirus, what are some things that you interact with when you're telling them in order to make them feel more safe about their flight?
Yeah, we get a lot of people expressing concern about that. But the good news is the aircraft operators have been extremely proactive without us even having to ask. Their new protocols are pretty stringent, so they want their crew to be masked up. There's a no contact rule. You're even allowed to load your own luggage if you don't want a line person or a crew member touching your luggage. The aircraft are being sanitized thoroughly. All touchable surfaces or sanitizable, if that's even a word, surfaces between flight legs, and then they're offering sanitizing wipes to the actual passengers if they want to wipe anything down themselves. So basically just above and beyond to make them feel comfortable. Outside of that, there's nothing much else that can be done. But I think it's a relatively safe way to fly, all things considered, just because of the amount of caution that's being taken.
Have you ever considered potentially like throwing an incentive in there, like, hey, if you get on the plane, there might be 5 stacks of toilet paper in the back for you to bring to your next destination?
Hey, if I had a way to source the toilet paper, I mean, at the time, the time that people started flying kind of out of panic during that 2-week period when everybody was starting to lock down, if I had a way to incentivize people's toilet paper, I probably would have, just to be funny. But at that point, none of us were able to get toilet paper.
And so it was actually a serious issue back then.
Yeah, I didn't even bring it up because I'm like, I don't want to tease anybody. This probably wouldn't even go over that funny right now with these people. But
I think a lot of people are still laughing, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, you have to know your audience.
For sure. And how is this coronavirus personally affecting you? And how are you going about managing your life right now?
Honestly, while I am crushed to see the way that so many people and businesses have been affected, for me personally, having 4 children and a husband and a generally busy life, I kind of feel like the family reset button has been hit, and I'm looking at it as a gift of time that we'll never get back. And so we're really, as a family, trying to harness that and spend a lot of time together. And we have teenagers. 2 of them are teenagers. They're kind of not always easy to relate to, and now that they can't see their friends, they only have us. They have just totally come around, and they like spending time with us, and we're having a lot of fun as a family, and it's been a really, really cool gift.
What are some good activities to do with your family, say if you're stuck at home, that you've seen has worked with your teenagers?
Well, I'm a good person to ask because my age ranges run the whole gamut. I've got toddler up to 9-year-old up to 14, 16-year-old. So
bullet points each one. Go.
Okay. We started playing the Jackbox games through Xbox.
Okay.
Those are super fun. Not always appropriate for the 9-year-old, even though he likes to join in. But for the older kids and the adults, that's been really fun. Good bonding time. We're playing lots of other games, too. Some of them are just question and answer games, truth, dares. We have a lot of the newer games that have been released that you can get on Amazon or Target. I can't remember the names of them. We're doing, we have an in-ground trampoline we just finished yesterday.
Nice. Projects.
Yes. So that's been super fun, being that I have 4 sons. Everybody has a way to get their energy out. We're doing a lot of cooking, a lot of baking, and a lot of family meals. So, it has not been bad. It's just
House is still okay, not burnt down, right?
The house is as clean as it's ever going to be. We have nothing else to do except clean the house and try to stay on top of house projects and all that. But it's hard for me to see all the businesses being affected. So I for that reason alone, and people I care about that have been really affected by this, I would love to see things start to go back to normal.
What businesses in the industry have you seen take a hardest hit?
Aircraft operators? Yeah. It really depends. Some of the smaller guys, they have the choice to continue whether they want to operate for a discount or not, because the market has completely shifted. If you are going to fly, you're going to have to fly for a discount if you want people to buy your trips. There's just too much competition out there. There's 2 large operators that have a big floating fleet of transcon aircraft, and they're going 50% below cost sometimes. As much as I want to buy that cheap flight and pass that on to my client, I worry about how that model for them right now, just for them to stay afloat or barely stay afloat, is affecting so many other operators that truly cannot afford or just won't do that. Yeah. I mean, there's a guy I know that owns 2 Challenger 605s, and he just stopped flying. He said, I'm just going to stop flying. I'm not going to go out of business, but until things take a more positive turn, he goes, I'm not going to do a transcon flight and lose money on it. And I completely understand that viewpoint. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are a lot of operators that are doing things at a loss. That's not sustainable. We know that. Yeah. Are we taking advantage of that so that we can give our clients cheaper flights? Sure. Will I feel bad when they go out of business? Yeah. But it's just that's up to them. You've got people going way below cost, and you've got other people that just don't want to bother, and they're waiting until there's an upswing, and then they'll start operating again.
You mentioned transcontinental flights, and that seems to be a big uptick right now because obviously with the commercial travel bans that have been going on, people will be resorting to private charter in order to get cross-country flying. Have you personally been booking any trips like that, and how have you been dealing with the regulations, per se, in other countries that may have even tighter restrictions than the U.S. does?
Well, when I meant transcon, I just meant coast to coast between the United States. Were you referring more to like an ultra long range trip?
Sure, yeah.
I've had a lot of inquiries for China. That's probably taken up the most of my time over the past 5 weeks. People trying to, Chinese citizens that are here that have a green card that want to get back to China, or vice versa, and that's been operationally extremely difficult because it's changing by the hour. The limitations, the entry requirements.
Can you go into some of the specifics of what those regulations may be compared from there to here?
So one of the issues was, for instance, I had a Chinese client who lives in the Bay Area but also has a home in Beijing, and he wanted to get back to Beijing. But this was right kind of at the point where things hadn't even peaked yet. I mean, things were just looking really ugly and grim for everything all around. There was one operator at the time, one operator in all of the United States that was willing to do the trip. That's since changed because there is a huge market now for Chinese flights. And whether it's moving PPE equipment or other types of goods or humanitarian flights, or just there really are a lot of Chinese nationals that are either trying to go back or forth. But back to my point, at the time there was one operator that was willing to do it. And they couldn't actually execute the trip entirely on their own because there was a diplomatic letter of approval required for the passenger to actually be able to be granted entry into their own country.
Yep.
That was a big pain because some of these people said that some of these passengers were saying that they were they didn't have the pull or the resources to obtain such a letter. And the operator has absolutely no bearing on that. Yeah. They're only there really to just put all the logistics together. Another issue we ran into was we had a passenger who was able to get a letter. We were able to make the flight work with just one fuel stop and a crew swap out in Anchorage, which is customary for those types of flights, just with duty time and all that. But they were not able to airline a relief crew because of the lack of airline availability with COVID. So it's like, okay, we can make the flight work, but we can't actually, airline the relief crew out to meet the other crew. And it's like, you're so close. And this is such these people are, looking at spending $250,000 on a one-way flight to go back to China, and we can't make one piece of the puzzle work because of the airlines being impacted so heavily. So just things like that. Like I said, operationally, huge pain, a lot of little formalities, and it does change on a daily basis. But those were two of the biggest issues. Airlining relief crew out, or the letters of approval through the government. Every day we saw different airports over in China changing their rules. So, one day you can land in Shanghai, the next day you can't land in Shanghai if you're part of general aviation. And then you, of course, also, this is probably worth mentioning, as soon as your crew members, doing a charter set foot on Chinese soil, they're wanting them to quarantine there for 14 days. Well, nobody here is going to want their pilots to be stuck in China on quarantine. Yep. So you have to work the flight in a way that you can actually touch down, stay on board. Well, you deplane your passengers because you can't fuel a 135 flight with passengers on board. You deplane the passengers, and then the crew stays on board while the plane gets fueled, and then they quick turn out of there, and then they go into rest somewhere else in the vicinity, but in another country. because they don't have the duty time to fly all the way back to Anchorage.
Yeah.
So a lot of moving parts, and just a lot of difficulty. And, you're getting questions from the clients every day, every hour. How does this work? How does this work? And it changes every day, every hour. So some of these flights would take 2 to 3 weeks just to put together because of all the different changes and all the different limitations. And really, you could be working with a set of information, and an hour later, it all completely changed on
And
you.
you have to adapt, and you're obviously monitoring the whole time to make sure that it goes along smoothly, right?
Yeah, and it's not smooth.
Right.
So, but that's been there's been a lot of that, a lot of demand for China back and forth. But of course, that is the most logistically and operationally difficult right now. So,
How much of like personal protective equipment have you seen flying around in regards to people scheduling for specific causes, like you mentioned, humanitarian or PPE equipment? Have you seen an uptick of that? And
I
where?
have. Yeah, not personally. I only dealt with one of those flights. It didn't actually end up going. It's a long story, but he was basically an entrepreneur who had some warehouses over in China with N95 masks. And he was trying to find an investor basically to buy the lot of masks. It was like 300,000 masks, and try to get them, or as many as he could, on one flight back here. But that proved to be pretty difficult because most investors don't want to put money down on something and then
return.
well, there is a return, but he needed the money, to go over there, and he needed the flight to be funded. But that was banking on him coming back and selling each mask individually at a specific rate so that the ROI was what was promised. And that just seems risky. So it did, that didn't end up happening. But
That's pretty crazy. Just like 300,000 and 95 masks. I got a bunch of China. Like, that's super random.
yeah, he was trying to basically find, networks of, I don't know. I think there was like some sort of an HMO network that he was trying to work a deal with. Basically, I'll give you the masks for whatever it was, $3 a pop, but you have to pay for the charter to go pick them up. But that all kind of fizzled out because we started seeing that a lot of the airlines were flying completely empty loads. And everybody wants to know why. Why are the airlines still flying when nobody's actually on the plane? Well, what you have to realize is at any given time, how many of these airplanes were normally in the air? So what basically was happening was these pilots were just flying empty planes to be parked indefinitely, and moving other crew members around to other aircraft. And that's why you're still seeing these airplanes in the air. But
Yeah, March Air Force Base over in Riverside. A buddy of mine was flying over it the other day, and he took a video, and it's just aircraft after aircraft after aircraft. Big guys, too,
yeah.
So I thought that was crazy.
Yeah, but a lot of them have actually, I think United went over and did a ton of PPE pickup or whatever other kind of goods. I don't have a lot of intricate detail on that. I've just heard from some of my other friends that fly for the airlines, for the legacies, that they have been utilizing some of the 121 equipment to go over to China and pick PPE up to help get it over here faster, since there's just so many formalities with cargo airlines and with customs. It's kind of a big pain, as you can imagine, being here in America. And we rely on China for
a lot of this
so many of our goods, and with everything happening, it just kind of created a huge issue with the supply chain.
And if you could think of one thing that could potentially help our industry, or something you see going forward that could be beneficial right now, do you have any thoughts what that could be? Worst case scenario versus best case scenario.
With in regards to chartering in general,
Yeah.
or I mean, there's always going to, the clientele that I have, they will always have a need, almost always have a need to fly private. But as far as the availability or the way that the operators have been impacted, that kind of remains to be seen. It really depends on how much longer this goes on for. When you've got a high floating fleet type of model with a large number of aircraft, and you've got a lot of employees you're paying, there's just so much overhead. I just don't see how it's sustainable for them to continue to stay in business if this goes on any longer. But some of the smaller ones, I used to work with a company a lot that's based in Florida, and they straight up said, they weren't doing anything. They weren't doing any one-ways. They weren't doing any discounts. Everything was just full round-trip pricing. Aircraft stayed at the home base until it went out on a trip, and then it came back to the home base, and it was paid all the way through so that the airplane could return back. And then that way the crew members, can go home at night. And so they're not doing as much business, but they're protecting themselves in a way that, they're not sending the airplane out and keeping it, transient somewhere, banking on it being sold at a later date, because it's just too risky right now. There's just too many there's too many uncertainties. So I'm not really sure.
So we're just gonna wait. That's what it sounds like.
I have a good feeling that when things start to pick up, we will be totally fine. I mean, the brokers will be totally fine. But I do worry about some of the operators. And that's sad for me, because some of these, companies we've really enjoyed working with, we don't want to see anything happen to them. And just to think that, somebody that launched a company like that put all their blood, sweat, and tears into it, and something like this can take it away. But it goes with any industry that's been negatively affected by the pandemic.
It's part of being an entrepreneur too,
Yeah. No risk, no reward.
Amen, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect wrap for the aviation news and what's happening right now with the coronavirus on the charter brokerage end. So thank you for coming on today.
Absolutely.
And the JPL Aviation is where leadership and aviation take off.
Absolutely.
And the JPL Aviation is where leadership and aviation take off.